What's going on?
It's a video.
Καλησπέρα σας και καλώς ορίσατε σε μια ακόμη προβολή των αμερικανικών πειραματικών αφηγήσεων, τις οποίες επιμελείται ο J.Tylen και έχουμε μαζί μας την ιδιαίτερη χαρά να φιλοξενούμε τη J.Tylen, μια πολύ ταλαντούχο και γενναία και γενναιόδορη σκηνοθέτη που θα μας παρουσιάσει τη δουλειά της. Good evening and welcome to one more presentation of American experimental narratives in the new millennium, who is curated by Avant-Garde, and we are presenting the film by J.Tylen Pretend, whom we thank very much for her generous support of the festival. Right, so,
do you need to translate that?
No.
She's translating.
Yeah, I'm translating myself. Yeah.
Thank you, Maria.
So,
John will.
yeah. So, I just wanted to, first of all, as the programming curator of this retrospective, thank once again, but I can't thank her enough, Maria Ominos, who's been a colleague and friend since I came to the FIAF Congress in 1991. And I have always had a sense from that Congress that she supported all kinds of cinema, including Greek silent films, but also, like me, has a special place for this idea of avant-garde, whatever you want to call it, independent, experimental, as an important kind of cinema to show.
Δεν μπορώ να ευχαριστήσω αρκετά την Μαρία Κομινού για την υποστήριξή της, την οποία γνώρισα το 1991 στο συνέδριο της Ομοσπονδίας των Ταινιοθηκών, όπου προωθούσε και τον ελληνικό βουβό κινηματογράφο, αλλά και υποστήριζε και εμένα σε αυτή την προσπάθεια πρόθεσης του πρωτοποριακού, ανεξάρτητου, πείτε το πιστεύετε, κινηματογράφου.
So, this is also the last program that I'll be presenting, so it's kind of a bittersweet moment. But we have a wonderful film to present, and all I'll say about it is that
Είναι μια πικρή, γλυκιά στιγμή, γιατί είναι το τελευταίο πρόγραμμα που θα παρουσιάσω από το ευρύτερο πρόγραμμα που επιμελήθηκα.
I saw this film in 2004 at the New York Video Festival at Lincoln Center, and when I saw it, it completely blew me away because I said, wow, there are so many great ideas behind the images and the sounds that I'm seeing.
Είδα αυτή την ταινία το 2004 στο Φεστιβάλ Βίντεο στο κέντρο του Λίκου και πραγματικά ενθουσιάστηκα γιατί πίσω από κάθε εικόνα υπάρχουν πολλές ιδέες.
And sometimes as a curator, films can stay with me a very long time, and as I say to the filmmakers, they may not hear from me for a long time. It doesn't mean I've forgotten about their films. So in 2014, I recontacted Julie to say there's this film I saw 10 years ago that's still in my head and we must show it in the festival.
Σαν επιμελητής μου μένουν ταινίες και παρόλο που λέω στους σκηνοθέτες, παρόλο που τις ξεχνάω ή μάλλον δεν τις ξεχνάω, τις κρατάω και έτσι από το 2004 ξαναήρθα το 2014 στη Julie και της είπα για την ταινία της.
And now I give you J.Tylen, the filmmaker.
Now, I want to ask, do you need time or we're okay? I don't need to stall for time, right? I think we're ready.
Take your time.
Okay. Thank you. I also thank Maria so much. It's been so much fun and such an education, really, to meet all of you and all the people that are working with you. It's just been wonderful.
Ευχαριστώ. Είναι θαυμάσιο και εκπαιδευτικό ταυτόχρονα να γνωρίσω όλους αυτούς τους ανθρώπους εδώ.
And I want to thank Avant-Garde once again, now that this is the last show he's introducing, but I have been honored to be in the company of filmmakers like Abigail Child and the other people that he's included, and this has been a wonderful opportunity for our audiences, particularly in Europe, to discover my film. This is its Greek premiere, and so thank you, John.
Ευχαριστώ τον J.Gartenberg και είναι τιμή μου που βρίσκομαι σε μια συντροφιά σκηνοθετών όπως η Abigail Child και όλων των άλλων στο πρόγραμμα που παρουσιάστηκε και είναι η ελληνική πρεμιέρα της ταινίας.
Okay, now I don't think I'm going to say much more because we'll have a Q&A afterwards. I think we want to get started. just say, when you see the divisions that are happening here, this was an experiment. Actually, each scene was my finding reasons for separating, dividing the image, various images, which is actually, it's about how the images relate to one another. And your eyes are supposed to wander over the screen. It's based on the premise that we can live with a certain kind of incompleteness. It's a very different incompleteness than Abigail has used so beautifully in what we just saw. There's the story scaffolding, but also visually you are free to wander and think about something.
Θα πούμε και περισσότερα μετά στο Q&A σε ερωταπαντήσεις. Αυτές οι διαιρέσεις της εικόνας που θα δείτε βασίζονται στην αρχή ότι θα πρέπει το βλέμμα σας να περιπλανηθεί ανάμεσα σε αυτές τις διαιρέσεις που συμβαίνουν μέσα στην εικόνα, γιατί και επίσης η βασική αρχή είναι ότι υπάρχει το ανολοκλήρωτο, διαφορετικό από τις childs, αλλά με την έννοια ότι μπορούμε να έχουμε αυτή την περιπλάνηση του βλέμματος.
Okay, so thank you all for coming. Thank you very much. Okay, do people have questions?
I thought maybe I'd start it off.
Sure, go ahead.
So I've seen this film, I think, at least 5 times, and each time there's something more incredible in it. I mean, it's just so amazing on so many levels. One, I think how meticulously, because of your knowledge of script writing, I now see in this how absolutely careful and precise every image placement is, and dialogue and emotional tension. And then overlaid on that, I think, which is one of the things we've talked about, is is avant-garde film still alive? Is experimental film still alive? And I think what's really striking about this film is how you embraced the digital cinema image. So I'm wondering if you could react to those comments in some way in terms of how you constructed this film at the shift from celluloid to digital, or something about the script writing, which you've talked a little bit about, and how how those two things kind of converge.
Μετά τις 5 φορές που έχω δει την ταινία, ανακαλύπτω πάντα κάτι καινούριο και αυτό με την εμπειρία σου ως σεναριογράφος, είδα το πόσο προσεκτικά είναι τοποθετημένες εικόνες σε κάθε διαφορετική οθόνη, σε κάθε διαφορετικό κάδρο. Και επίσης άλλο ένα σημείο που θα ήθελα να σταθώ είναι αυτό το πέρασμα στην ψηφιακή εποχή και το πέρασμα από το celluloid στο ψηφιακό.
Okay. Well, thank you, John, again, and thank you for programming us. You seem to this. Yes, this was entirely a creature of the digital camera that I won't give the whole history of it, but
αυτό είναι ένα πλάσμα της ψηφιακής κάμερας.
So we had 9 cameras on this shoot.
Με 9 κάμερες.
And we had 3 operators.
Με 3 εικονολήπτες.
And they were all documentary camera women.
Οι οποίες προέρχονταν από το ντοκιμαντέρ.
And they all knew these cameras very well. I don't want to geek out here. Let's see how. So we knew what the cameras could do.
Ξέραμε όλες τι μπορούσαν να κάνουν οι κάμερες.
So they're very small, most of them.
Μικρές.
For example, the dining rooms or the dinner scene.
Η σκηνή στην τραπεζαρία.
So we had 2 cameras, the small, they're palm quarters. They were called because you could hold.
DV cam, right?
Yeah, yes, all DV cam. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you, Abigail.
Δύο μικρές κάμερες χειρός που στην ουσία λέγονται κάμερες παλάμης, γιατί είναι τόσο μικρές όσο παλάμη.
And this was a format called mini DV.
Mini DV.
So it was standard definition, and you can see. I don't know how I'm going to remaster it, so it stays in film. But so we could have one camera at the children's height on this Lazy Susan going around from the interior, and another camera slightly higher, so that we got the parents, and then it was turned by my camera woman's long arm, Samantha, And so we did the scene a few times, and we got the glimpses, the glances, the arms reaching over. The dialogue was scripted.
Η σκηνή στην τραπεζαρία έχει μια κάμερα κάτω από στην κρυψώνα στο τραπέζι, μία επάνω. Η εικονολήπτρια γυρνούσε την κάμερα χειροκίνητα και έτσι πήραμε όλα αυτά τα βλέμματα. Και μετά...
Yes, and that was inspired by reading about George Cukor, who directed part of Gone with the Wind, and he directed the ballroom scene, the dancing scene. And he put Clark Gable and Vivian Leigh on a turntable with the camera.
Ο οποίος έβαλε τον Clark Gable και την Vivian Leigh πάνω σε ένα περιστρεφόμενο τραπέζι.
So that's that fluidity we've been talking about. And one other example that's I think unique to the digital cameras we were using then, they had presets. So you could hit the button and get photo negative.
Είχαν κάποιες ρυθμίσεις όπου μπορούσες να πάρεις τα αρνητικά της εικόνας.
Right, so we knew we had the PD one, never mind where it works. Anyway, so we had the Sony cameras that could do this. We knew we wanted Ellie, the little girl, to get lost in the woods. And so we knew that the color photo negative was this brilliant, if you put it on green, it was this wonderful pink and violet. So we had her dressed in pink so that we could have that sequence where one camera is on the regular color and one is on the photo negative. They're both shooting on the same camera, the PD-150.
Έχοντας αυτές τις Sony και με αυτές τις ρυθμίσεις, ξέραμε ότι τα χρώματα θα ήταν στο αρνητικό τους. Οπότε η Έλλη, όταν χάθηκε στο δάσος, φοράει ροζ, ώστε να έρθει σε ένα αντίθετο πράσινο και μέσα στο πράσινο να έρθει σε ένα άλλο χρώμα και να υπάρχουν όλες αυτές οι αντιθέσεις σε αυτή την σεκάνηση.
So I think that's one of the first times that somebody would use a costume design knowing what these presets could do in the digital cameras that we have then.
Έτσι, τα κουστούμια μαζί με την ψηφιακή τεχνολογία είναι από τις πρώτες φορές που συνδυάστηκαν.
So none of the negative was done in post?
No, none.
Δεν έγινε μετά στο μοντάζ.
Yeah, that was all in camera.
Το αρνητικό.
And then of course we did, those of you who just saw Abigail's film, she also had a cute girl in black and white photo negative, but there's kind of some, you know, the baby face and there's a magical quality.
Στην ταινία της Abigail υπήρχε το βρέφος σε αρνητικό.
And I just want to intervene on one other point because I think it's really critically important in our discussion of experimental film and of Hollywood cinema, both which you love and I love and other filmmakers love. But I think it would be worth for you to discuss that in Hollywood cinema, to a great degree, there is conflicts, and at the end there's resolution. And I think what's extraordinary in the end of your film is this open-endedness in terms of your playing with time and space, the projection of the future of the older sister growing up with one story and the other part that she returns. And I think this is really critical because that must have been a conscious choice of yours, how to keep this open-ended. I wonder if you could just talk about this from a sort of scripting point of view or things that you saw in the script writing that you were doing and what you wanted to achieve.
Υπάρχει αυτή η συζήτηση με το πειραματικό σινεμά και το Hollywood και αυτό που είναι ενδιαφέρον ότι είναι στις ταινίες του Hollywood συνήθως το τέλος έχει καλή έκβαση. Ενώ εδώ πέρα είναι ανοιχτό το τέλος, υπάρχει μια ανοιχτότητα. Και από την εμπειρία σου ως σεναριογράφος σίγουρα ήταν μια συνειδητή επιλογή. Οπότε αν μπορείς να σχολιάσεις για αυτή την ανοιχτότητα του τέλους όπου βλέπουμε την αδερφή όταν έχει μεγαλώσει, αλλά ξαναγυρνάμε σε μια άλλη εκδοχή.
Well, I had mentioned at the beginning that this was a Hollywood pitch, but I didn't really have the ending, which is why it never turned into that kind of story. But I was very influenced by a film by Peter Weir called Picnic at Hanging Rock, where the girl's never found. I saw that when it first came out, and it just stayed with me. And in our discussions, can I keep talking?
Όπως είπα, ήταν ένα pitch, ένα διαγωνισμός για το Hollywood, το οποίο βέβαια δεν έγινε. Στο τέλος εμπνεύστηκα από μια ταινία του Peter Weir, Picnic
Picnic at Hanging Rock.
Στο οποίο το κορίτσι ποτέ δεν βρέθηκε.
1970, 72 perhaps. And that's why I like to think of films on a spectrum, on a continuum, rather than either or, because there is, what do we call it, art cinema or European, or, you know, L'Avventura is another example, where we never know, we don't get those answers, and yet there's still, you know, scripted narrative films. So that was a premise for me. What happens if you try to solve a problem by faking a kidnapping and it becomes a real kidnapping?
Θέλω να σκέφτομαι τις ταινίες σε ένα συνεχές παράμα αυτό το διαχωρισμό. Είτε υπάρχουν αυτά τα προβλήματα, ευρωπαϊκός κινηματογράφος, συνεφίλ και όλα αυτά. Οπότε ο τρόπος που σκέφτηκα το σενάριο είναι πώς μια πλασματική απαγωγή μπορεί να γίνει πραγματική.
And in fact, I had always thought that the theatrical, the projected feature version of Pretend was an interim. It was
The projection of
yes, a feature film like this with a fixed beginning and end. I knew I had to create that kind of film in a feature length, more than an hour, to be taken seriously as a narrative film.
Οπότε σε προβολές σινεμά ήξερα ότι έπρεπε να δημιουργήσω μια μεγάλου μήκους ταινίας για να την πάρουν σοβαρά.
But my goal was in a possibly the DVD or some other future technology that it would, at the time I was thinking DVD, you could choose, I would have multiple audio, and what Abigail just described at the Czechoslovakian pavilion where you could choose one or another ending. So I wanted my audience, and I wanted it also to be touchscreen.
Σε DVD, σε μελλοντική τεχνολογία, αυτό που σκεφτόμουν είναι αυτό που ανέφερε η Abigail πριν για το τσεχοσλαβάκικο περίπτερο, ότι μπορείς να διαλέγεις το τέλος.
And I did spend about 3 or 4 years on trying to make it work, where if you touched one of the boxes, then you would get one of the 3 or 4 different soundtracks, different music, a different poem, and then you could get in, if you stayed in Ellie's world, you could get that Ellie comes back. And you could get a version where this is the lonely girl who picks up, the lonely waitress who picks up cute boys like Derek Cecil, who's now doing quite well as an actor in television.
Αυτό που σκεφτόμουν για 3-4 χρόνια είναι μέσω της αφής να μπορώ να αλλάζουν τα soundtrack, οι επιλογές και οι ρόλοι που μπορούσες να το δεις από την πλευρά της μικρής Έλλης ή από την πλευρά της σερβιτόρας και του...
But we hit a wall. The DVD technology didn't really coalesce with the touchscreen technology. And so we just took a break.
Τα DVD και αυτή η απτική τεχνολογία δεν έχουν σμίξει ακόμα.
I mean, I think this is so ahead of its time. I think that's what's amazing about it as well. It's both, you know, the technology, the division, the overlay, and certainly your ideas for a future.
Οι διαχωρισμοί και το πώς έχει γίνει και όλη η ιδέα για...
And it also, there's something recently in the last 2 years I saw that Bill Morrison, whose film Great Flood showed here, he did some kind of installation at the Brooklyn Academy of Music where people, and I'm not very technically proficient, but you could actually click on all these found images and you could change it. So I think Abby's correct that in 2004 that you were already kind of, your head is already like understanding where this is going, I think is quite wonderful and extraordinary.
Και ο Bill Morrison που η ταινία του Μεγάλη Πλημμύρα παίχτηκε εδώ πέρα, έχει μια εγκατάσταση όπου με ένα κουμπί μπορούσες να κάνεις επιλογές και αυτό είναι ότι ήδη από το 2004 είσαι πολύ μπροστά από τον καιρό σου.
And actually 20 years ago, MIT developed for the Pentagon a pointing system. And what's amazing, I had someone from MIT showed it where you could point to a map, and you know what the map was? This is what's so frightening. It was a map of the Caribbean. This was before they invaded Grenada and Nicaragua, and it was a map of the Caribbean in which the generals could point to a ship and move it.
And
So
Wait,
already there, but not out.
Let her translate.
Okay.
Let her
Ο
translate.
MIT έφτιαξε για το Πεντάγωνο ένα σύστημα όπου οι στρατηγοί θα μπορούν να αναδείχνουν ένα χάρτη που ήταν και της Καραϊβικής και πριν γίνει η εισβολή στην Γρανάδα και στην Νικαράγουα.
And so you were going to say something
I was
about
going to say, if you've seen Minority Report by Steven Spielberg,
Yes.
and that system now exists where he's touching and moving things, and he did do research with
Onto that,
futurists and with the kind of scientists who work with the
Στην
Pentagon.
ταινία του Spielberg, στο
And now
Minority
you see
Report
it on
υπάρχει.
the
And that's where that
CSI and all
comes
those
from.
things where they move the glass.
And I was also going to say that
Philip Dick as well.
that was his story, Philip K. Dick. Very good. In fact, that's another story about how that got made, but anyway, we won't go into that.
Questions? More
From
questions?
fiction they go.
Oh, I just want to say one more thing about Bill Morrison. Bill Morrison was in the audience for my MoMA screening, the Museum of Modern Art screening of this film, and he actually answered the last question, a question of, well, your ending, how is your ending multi-channel? And to me, it was still a compromise, it was not the ending, and Bill was the one who said, no, you have two endings at once.
Right.
You can only do that multi-channel. And I actually hadn't consciously.
Yes, but that's totally
But Bill
what,
saw that,
of
and
course.
so we are all influenced by each other's work.
I saw 3 endings because there's the
Πάλι στον
moment
Bill
early.
Well, hold on a second, let her
Πάλι στον
finish.
Bill Morrison, ο οποίος είδε την προβολή μου και είπε ότι ενώ εγώ έπρεπε να κάνω ένα συμβιβασμό για το τέλος και να δώσω ένα τέλος, εκείνος είδε ότι υπήρχαν 2 τέλη της ιστορίας ταυτόχρονα.
And the third ending, or the first for me, was when she goes into all the colored squares. Like she disappears into the digital.
And that is exactly what it is. It's a Final Cut Pro crash. Anybody who
yes,
edited,
yes.
I don't know, they still have it.
Υπάρχει και ένα τρίτο τέλος που είναι πριν στη διάρκεια, όταν το κοριτσάκι μπαίνει σε όλο αυτό το πιξελιασμένο χώρο, το χρωματιστό, όπου εκεί είναι όταν το πρόγραμμα αυτό του μοντάζ, το Final Cut Pro, έχει κρασάρει.
This was a very early version. I was like Final Cut Pro 1.1, and you had to render everything. That's why it took 2 years to edit. And this colorful, horrible thing would show up. This beautiful thing saying, "You blew it. You're broken. You
Σε
crashed."
μια προηγούμενη έκδοση του Final Cut Pro που έπρεπε να τα περάσει όλα και να τα κάνει συνέχεια render, αυτό κράσαρε και εμφανίστηκε αυτό το όμορφο πράγμα.
But I think what's so extraordinary about that is that there were filmmakers from decades before working in celluloid who were highlighting the film grain as part of the look. And this is the digital pixel, which is a building element of what you did that is incorporated in your film on a formal level, on a technical level, but also on a narrative level, which I think makes it on a whole, makes it so conscious and beautiful at the same time.
Παλιότερα οι κινηματογραφιστές πολλές φορές δείχνανε τον κόκο του φιλμ στο celluloid και τώρα το pixel είναι αυτό που εσύ το χρησιμοποιείς και σε τεχνικό και σε αφηγηματικό επίπεδο.
And it was just luck that my assistant captured this because I would do something with it. She's brilliant filmmaker on her own right, and it just happened that it was the pink and the green of Ellie's palette.
Η βοηθός μου που επίσης είναι πολύ αξιόλογη ήταν το αποθήκευσε αυτό και ήταν σε πράσινο και ροζ και ήταν φανταστικά.
But Abigail's exactly right. She disappears into the Final Cut Pro crash. And I slowed it as far down as you could slow it with the program then.
Εξαφανίζεται όταν κρασάρει το πρόγραμμα.
And I made it and I blew it up as large as you could make it in the program, and that pulsing was at every level, that creepy.
Και το μεγάλωσα και υπήρχε αυτή η δόνηση των pixel.
And as a curator, one of the things that's so exciting for me in seeing Abby's films, many of which, not all, have rapid montage and this sense of simultaneity cutting across shots. And in Julie, there's a whole other approach, which is the simultaneity. Yes, it goes from shot to shot, but there's so much happening within the frame. For me, this is the richness of all your creative visions. You're coming from very distinct places and very specific ideas.
Kind of.
What?
You have to see Unbound.
I have to see
There's that
Unbound.
layering going on there.
Right.
But
Right.
10 years later,
Σαν
so it's kind of wild.
Σαν επιμελητής θέλω να πω ότι υπάρχουν δύο είδη ταυτοχρονίας, όπου στις ταινίες της Abigail είναι η ταυτοχρονία από πλάνο σε πλάνο, ενώ εδώ η ταυτοχρονία είναι μέσα στο ίδιο το κάδρο και είναι διαφορετικές, ο πλούτος αυτών των διαφορετικών αντιμετωπίσεων που μπορούμε να έχουμε γι' αυτό.
If I could say something more to your original question about scripting, and really what we do in I think really in any piece of film, you are arranging and manipulating time. You are making decisions about time, about duration, about the rhythm of shots.
Σε κάθε σενάριο αυτό που κάνεις είναι να διαχειρίζεσαι το χρόνο και το ρυθμό των πλάνων.
And I think there is an anxiety when you divide up the screen. What you really are doing is saying, you don't know when now is.
Ναι, και υπάρχει αυτή η αγωνία όταν διαιρείς την οθόνη, είναι ότι δεν ξέρεις πότε είναι το τώρα.
So I was consciously creating in my screenplay scenario occasions to expand that we could have a now that was also a memory and also a wish, which we have with the father longing to have his wife, forgive him.
Εξερευνούσα ένα τώρα που ήταν μπορεί να ήταν και ανάμνηση αλλά και ευχή, όπως αυτό με τον πατέρα.
And also in the scene after their fight, we had anchored a very long take, which is a digital option, in the real time of the mother smoking on one side, and then eventually the father comes out. And then above that, I have the mother smoking and the father wandering. And what I discovered was now could be stretched. It didn't have to be precise simultaneity. People were not confused that the mother was smoking in slow-mo in one and slightly differently on the porch. I mean, you still had to be thoughtful about it, but that to me was a discovery that I made only in the editing process, that there was an elastic now. And I think Abigail does some of that too.
Ανακάλυψε αυτή την ελαστικότητα του χρόνου του τώρα, όταν σε αυτή τη σκηνή μετά τον Τζακωμό που υπάρχει το πλάνο μεγάλης διάρκειας κάτω που και το γενικό πλάνο και βγαίνουν από το σπίτι και η μητέρα καπνίζει και ο πατέρας είναι από πίσω, ότι αυτές οι ταυτοχρονίες είναι αρκετά ελαστικές ως προς το ότι μπορούσα να δείξω το πολύ κοντινό πλάνο και όλα αυτά. Υπήρχε δηλαδή μια διάνοιξη του χρόνου και αυτό το ανακάλυψα στο τραπέζι του μοντάζ.
So we should have some questions after questions.
How much did it cost?
Oh, how much did it cost?
Yeah.
Πόσο κόστησε?
I did a rewrite for Paul Verhoeven, and that was my budget. It was $200,000. And then about that, yes.
How much?
200.
200.
200.
Yeah.
No, why I laughed
Yeah,
was
why are you laughing?
because I think it's so subversive and wonderful that this money, that from script writing, that you then took that, not to bank it, but to express it in a creative vision of something you wanted to say. I think that's really fabulous.
I wanted complete creative control.
$10,000 για το σενάριο, το οποίο μετά είναι φανταστικό ότι έγινε ένα τόσο δημιουργικό όραμα.
No one understood what I was going to do, and I knew I couldn't write a grant. Even my camera people, who were very inventive, but it was all in my head.
Right.
And so I needed, and I spent a decade making it as a screenwriter in Hollywood so I could make this film.
Κανένας δεν ήξερε τι θα κάνω και έτσι κατάφερα να πάρω αυτά τα χρήματα, ούτε οι εικονολήπτες. Αλλά ναι, και από την εμπειρία μου 10 χρόνια στο Hollywood ήξερα πώς θα τα πάρω και μετά να το κάνω.
And actually Paul Verhoeven was subversive in other ways, but I eventually left the Hollywood studio system so I could start this. But people like Paul Verhoeven and then later Robert Altman hired me outside of that. Which is hard to explain, I guess, if you don't understand how that system works, but it's very enveloping with the line. Yeah, so he hired me.
Ναι, της έδωσε αυτά τα χρήματα και έφυγε από το Hollywood για να κάνει αυτές τις δουλειές και την προσέλαβε αργότερα έξω από το Hollywood.
Yeah, just so that I would
Have
do.
you tried to get this released?
Oh,
Προσπάθησε.
I
Yeah,
think Film
sure.
Forum might
Προσπάθησε
show.
yeah. I mean, I did somewhat, but I never expected distribution. I was delighted
Well,
that
maybe time is correct.
it may be. I would remaster it and possibly even when I can do my.
Θα προσπαθήσω να το
Ending.
επιμεληθώ και να βρω ευκαιρίες να το διανύμω.
I'll send it to Karen if you'd like.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Karen's a film from.
Is the programmer there?
Yeah.
Which
So-
I think that's also interesting because we talk a lot, and with Maria we've talked about this idea of experimental or avant-garde, and then there's the commercial and the Hollywood, and how all of us who work in this field feel that they're much more closely related
Absolutely.
in many ways, and that, as I say, even though they have different economies or economic systems, there's a lot of interaction. I think part of what you, who actually physically has lived in the heart of one and lived in the heart of the other, exemplifies.
Ότι μπορεί να υπάρχει αυτή η αλληλεπίδραση ανάμεσα στο πειραματικό και στο Hollywood και όλοι εμείς βλέπουμε αυτή την αλληλεπίδραση και είσαι ένα παράδειγμα που έχει ζήσει και στους δύο κόσμους με αυτές τις διαφορετικές οικονομίες.
Scorsese says that, but he says that, I mean, authors did not emerge when the Europeans think. Already in the 30s in the Hollywood, I mean, there were directors who would do one film for themselves and many films for the studio.
Yeah.
So, Julie, you are part of a great tradition.
It's a long tradition.
Όπως έλεγε και ο Σκορτσέζε, οι δημιουργοί δεν ήταν στην Ευρώπη, αλλά ήδη από τη δεκαετία του 30 στην Αμερική υπήρχαν δημιουργοί στο Hollywood που κάνανε μια ταινία για τον εαυτό τους και 30 για το στούντιο.
Are there any other?
Well, my question is kind of bugging me from early on when we had the round table about the narrative, and I'm not sure if I should ask this question right now, but the thing is that the medium is changing. So we had the impact of TV in cinema, and now we have the impact of cinema on TV, and now we have the impact of internet into everybody. So we have the internet, which is a huge audiovisual thing with new ways of writing. Everybody is using what Avant-Garde used to do. Jump cuts.
Completely agree.
Okay, some are good, some are bad. Okay, but it's a lot of quantity and lesser quality. However, the thing is, do you believe, and that should also be for Abigail and John and everybody, do you believe that the internet and the way that people create and consume audiovisual products has an effect on the avant-garde, or does the avant-garde have an effect on the internet, or anyway, it's a big question.
Από πριν ήθελα να τη ρωτήσω αυτή την ερώτηση για την αφηγηματικότητα.
I have it.
Και τα μέσα αλλάζουν και υπήρχε η επίδραση της τηλεόρασης στον κινηματογράφο και του κινηματογράφου στην τηλεόραση και σήμερα έχουμε το διαδίκτυο και στο διαδίκτυο βλέπουμε ότι χρησιμοποιούνται αυτές οι πειραματικές τεχνικές όπως τα jump cut, άλλοτε καλός, άλλοτε κακός. Θεωρείτε ότι...
Το θέμα είναι πώς θα αλλάζουν τα πράγματα και αν θα αλλάξουν και τι
πώς θα υλοποιηθούν.
Σε Avant-Garde να επηρεάσει αυτό το καινούριο, να σκεφτεί πώς οι άνθρωποι καταναλώνουν και δημιουργούν σε αυτό το νέο οπτικοακουστικό πεδίο.
I'll just say one thing for a second. Whenever there is a new entertainment or art reproductive technology, and we have now at least 100 years history of this, there is a sense for the generation that comes of age with that new technology, that new technology is the new reality, you know, the new baseline, so to speak.
Εδώ και 100 χρόνια που έχουμε αυτή την τεχνολογία αναπαραγωγής της εικόνας, κάθε φορά που βγαίνει μια τεχνολογία, η γενιά μεγαλώνει με την ιδέα ότι αυτή θα είναι η νέα τεχνολογία.
And in truth, every technology is its own archive, you know, its own sensor.
Κάθε τεχνολογία είναι το δικό της αρχείο και ο δικός της λογοκριτής.
and its own conveyor and celebrator of new forms. So,
και εξερευνητής και εξυμνητής νέων μορφών.
When you had the invention of sound recording, for example, all kinds of people who'd never heard classical music because they did not live near a symphony orchestra were discovering Bach and Beethoven and different conductors and just proliferation of a musical experience.
Όταν εφευρέθηκε ο ήχος, πάρα πολλοί άκουσαν κλασική μουσική.
But at the same time, there were composers and conductors and critics who despised recording and said, no, the pure experience is in the concert hall.
Υπήρχαν όμως συνθέτες και κριτικοί που λέγανε ότι η πραγματική μουσική εμπειρία είναι στο μέγαρο.
Yeah, so in truth it is both. I think if you have the concert hall, you have the recording. With the internet, it is very much like that invention of recording. Yesterday I sat next to a young man who started watching Ubu at 15, which is the website for all kinds of experimental and avant-garde film. Paul Scherritz, Mikas, everybody. That was his. I don't know if Mikas is on there.
Μετά από 15 χρονών κάποιος που έκατσε δίπλα μου έβλεπε το Ubu, που είναι ένα site με όλο το αρχαιακό του avant-garde κινηματογράφου.
Yeah, it's controversial in terms of ownership and rights and payment for the filmmakers. It's zero to them. However, but that's a separate. To me, that's a separate issue. I'm just feeling that's a separate issue.
Υπάρχει ένα πρόβλημα βέβαια με αυτό το site λόγω των δικαιωμάτων.
In the narrative point of view, the internet, it began with the DVD, but the internet is creating a long form of dramatic writing, so that we are in a golden age. You know, it's called binge watching, but really it's like the invention of the novel, which we spoke of earlier today, where people experience a series.
And you're thinking of like Netflix?
Yes, I'm thinking of Netflix, Hulu Plus. I'm thinking of how you can watch all 5 seasons of Breaking Bad. It's a completely, is it avant-garde?
Με το ίντερνετ και την αφηγηματικότητα.
But it is new. It is as new as when people in London waited for another, episode of Dickens to come out in a magazine. And now we have.
Με το ίντερνετ
Anyway, you see my point.
Με το ίντερνετ και την αφηγηματικότητα συμβαίνει αυτό που είπε και η Abigail για την νουβέλα. Αυτό που ζούμε τώρα είναι μια επέκταση της αφηγηματικότητας όπου καταναλώνονται με λεμαργία οι ιστορίες όπως αυτές οι σειρές, το Breaking Bad, το Hulu ή από το Netflix.
Which is actually how the creators experience it. We create a series at a shot, so people are becoming I don't know, higher level. It's a much more complex form of participation.
Και από την πλευρά των δημιουργών υπάρχει αυτό ότι δημιουργούν και δημιουργεί σειρές.
I would take a little bit of an issue with that in terms of the long form, because I think what's happened actually is that the explosion of DVDs where you could intervene into the chapters, where you can go to the extras, the texting, the availability of the internet where a user can pull up a clip, even if it's a feature film of 90 minutes, and can look at 5 minutes of it and then go to something else and then check their phone. I mean, I see what my nephews and nieces do, are in their 20s and 30s. I think actually fragments reality in their experiential way in a radically different sense than when I grew up. Not only was it that I grew up before DVD and video, but there was, in terms of the technological reception of all this material, was basically watching it on television from the beginning to the end as the broadcaster created it, or from the beginning to the end as the exhibitor went to it. So there was a perceptual sense of the creation of the work as it was originally intended by the filmmaker or the studio. But, and I think now what's happened is there's more facility for people to understand. I mean, I remember when we showed some of these films in Pesaro.
Και με το DVD αυτό που μπορούσαμε να διαλέξουμε τα κεφάλαια, αλλά και στο ίντερνετ σήμερα μπορούμε όπως κάνουν τα νύψια μου, να πάρουν 5 λεπτά από ταινίες. Και έχει χαθεί αυτή η αίσθηση που είχαμε εμείς παλιά, ότι ένα έργο ξεκινούσε από κάπου και πήγαινε κάπου και ότι και η παραγωγή το φτιάχνανε από μια αρχή πηγαίνοντας προς ένα τέλος. Ενώ σήμερα η εμπειρία και η αντίληψη, η αντιληπτικότητα είναι πολύ διαφορετική λόγω αυτής της αποσπασματικότητας και της επέμβασης μέσω της επιλογής που μπορούμε να κάνουμε από ένα θράψμα από το διαδίκτυο.
So like at another festival, there was a 21-year-old kid who came to all the screenings and said, I understand your film and your film completely as an implicit experience. There was something about it, and so I would just offer that perspective.
And I agree. The digital
Οι
native.
πολλοί νέοι καταλαβαίνουν ακριβώς σαν μια πολύ δική τους εμπειρία αυτές τις ταινίες.
And I wasn't going to say anything, but since I disagree a little bit with both of you,
Oh, no.
I'll say something else.
The New Yorkers argue.
I just think technology is always plus and
Οι
minus.
διαφωνίες των νεοϊορκέζων.
So that I think
I agree.
the binge watching, I think, is exactly what it says. It's binge watching. I'm not sure that's such a plus. And on the other hand, the ability to move from one to the other, I'm not sure that's such a plus either. I think, access is fabulous, but they've got proof we don't have attention spans anymore.
Right.
And they're doing tests on children, and I see it in myself when I come home and I waste an hour on the internet, and I have to force myself not to. So I just think, like all technology, it's got a plus and it's got a minus. And I mean, I can say much more, but I think it's
Υπάρχει αυτή η λεμαργία της θέασης από τη μία μεριά όσον αφορά το ίντερνετ και τις σειρές, και από την άλλη όσον αφορά και την αποσπασματικότητα όταν γυρνάω σπίτι και πρέπει να περάσω μία ώρα και να σταματήσω τον εαυτό μου από το να πηδάει από το ένα πράγμα στο άλλο. Η τεχνολογία, καταλαβαίνουν, το έχει και τα υπέρ και τα κατά.
Can I make one summary point? Because then I guess we have to go, right?
We have to finish and continue the bar. Yes.
Okay, well, I'll just make it really quick. For me, that fragmentation is also a capacity to take in a new language, which is why I'm making my film this way.
Η φρασματικότητα όμως είναι και μια δυνατότητα, ικανότητα για μια νέα γλώσσα.
So one thing I just wanted to say in closing is, in terms of this program, is there's been a lot of staff that have kind of been running around, that have been working very hard, and I want to take my hats off to all of you, because I know you're often very quiet, but I think there's a lot of people that are going into